Alright, what's going on guys, it's Zeno Panda here. Apologies for if the mic audio is a little bit shoddy. I forgot my other one when I came back home, so I'm just using one of my older ones, but the grind don't stop for Honkai Star Rail. But that's kind of crazy, low-key. I don't know why, but that's just crazy. But anyways, as 1.4 is around the corner, I want to talk about where all the characters stand in the meta as of 1.3. and go into a little speculation on where they'll stand at the beginning of 1.4 or by the end of 1.4 when both of the 5-star characters come out. So just made a quick tier list based on 1.3. Now for all the tiers, we have C tier to triple S tier because I believe we have enough characters in the game at this point to have as broad of a tier list as possible, ranging from C to triple S. Now, a couple of guidelines for this tier list. All 4-star characters will be assumed at E4. That's mostly the average amount of Eidolons people have for these 4 stars. And this will be in terms of 1.3. So initially, I will talk about them in terms of their status in 1.3. And then at the end of the video, I'll talk about who may or not change as 1.4 comes out. Then going over the individual tiers, C tier is just characters that you don't really want to use because there's just better options out there already. B tier is underperforming characters where they've already been severely power crept and don't have that much use. Now this is the most interesting part of the tier list. So from B plus to S minus is going to range characters that are decently reliable to very reliable in most of the content, or they excel at a very specific niche. So maybe, for example, the dot characters will fall in this realm, or maybe some other follow-up attackers may follow up in this realm. It's just specific characters that excel within a specific niche but don't really provide that much value outside of said niche, or it's just characters that are decently reliable in all sorts of the content. Now for S tier, these characters are just universally great units that you can just plug and play into any content of the game and they will perform no matter what. Their overall potential isn't as great as some of the better characters, but you can still plug them in to any team comp that you want, into any content that you want in the game, and they'll still do great. Then into S plus, these are the most popular characters in the game that majority of people will want to use because they are very crucial to have on someone's account. But they're not necessarily in that triple S rank because they have 1 or 2 set of drawbacks. Like maybe they have some sort of high investment cap that they have to get to in order to be that game-changing character, or they have a specific weakness that they can't really target in their kit. So these characters are obviously some of the best, but basically have one thing that draws them back or have a higher level of entry. Finally, for triple S, these are the characters that Hoyo tried to balance, but their kit can be worked around to make it so that there's no need to worry about whatever quote-unquote drawbacks they have, that they're just completely broken. And in my opinion, there's only 2 of these characters right now. In the future, I know for sure we're gonna get these type of characters, but for now I think that it's just 2 truly broken characters in the game that are supposed to have some set drawbacks but do not have any as we know of. So without further ado, let's get straight into C tier. And for C tier, it's pretty simple. We got 4-star damage dealers right here, just Arlon, Hook, and Herta. I know Herta in especially MLC 10 has been getting a lot of love, where if you really invest into her correctly and get the great supports on her, she'll actually perform really well. Just for clarification, no character in this game is inherently bad to the point where you can't use them in any sort of the content. Like I just said, Herta can perform really well in MLC 10 because both characters have that ice weakness. You just require a lot of investment. Then for Hook and Arlon, they also fall under that same issue of just being 4-star damage dealers. And especially for Arlon too, there's already been a plethora of lightning characters that came out so there's no real use into using him. And Hook, even though she has very nice numbers overall, her kit is just not in tune at all. It's super clunky, very skill point heavy, with very diminishing returns. Now moving on to B tier, the sort of underwhelming characters. Natasha got absolutely shafted this patch because Lynx just does everything she does, but completely better. Like, even though they do have the same amount of skill point usage, Lynx's overtime healing and the fact that she has an AoE cleanse over Natasha's skill cleanse it just goes leaps and bounds over Natasha. Lynx just completely shafted Natasha. Then Serval, she's actually doing pretty well for herself. You know, you could put her in a Kafka comp to have like a double shock DOT going on, but outside of that, she's not that great anymore. Then for Destruction MC, you need to break the bank for him to be somewhat good. So even though his multipliers are high, it's just still the fact that because he is the starting character that you get, he just falls under that. He just falls victim to being just pretty shit. Then for Dong Hung, even though just like physical MC, he does dish out a lot of damage. It's just, he just suffers from the same issues as physical MC, from just being pretty clunky and having really suspect and having very limited options when it comes to dealing damage because he's a single target damage dealing wind character. And plus he also got power crept by Blade, so. Alright, now moving on to the B plus A minus tier. This is that lower end spectrum of decently reliable characters. So starting off, I got March 7th in here. Now, she is still pretty useful in terms of specific preservation comps in Swarm Disaster, where you just where you run the preservation resonance and then you get a shield onto whatever character that you apply with March, and then the quake damage that you get out of that can go pretty crazy. So March is still pretty good. She also has a cleanse on her skill too that's really valuable to have, and she especially works really well with Yanqing. So I'm planning on building my March to pair with my Yanqing, but outside of that, she can't really solo sustain an entire team because she'll need a lot of skill points in order to do that, and it's not really efficient for the entire team because of that. Next, Fire MC, I'm kind of torn between putting them between B plus, A minus, and A tier, because at some points, Fire MC is awesome for sustaining, especially against the Crazy Ape. Probably the second best sustainer to have against that enemy, because you literally taunt him, and then it doesn't matter where his like lock on goes. You can literally freely use skill points amongst your entire party as long as he's taunted. And if you just get like a couple percentage of effect hit rate on Fire MC, that'll happen most of the time. But outside of that, sometimes they really struggle with solo sustaining, and solo sustaining is really important for these defensive characters, because you want to, in your team comps, you want to have supports that can help your offensive character. So if your sustainer can't, so if your defensive option can't solo sustain, that becomes a pretty big issue, because they need help on top of their sustaining in order to actually be useful. So Fire MC really just suffers from low base numbers, especially on that shield. Absolutely no clue why it's super low shields that they provide, but I think it's the main thing that really hinders their kit overall. So, but they're still pretty decent in preserving characters too. If you have nothing else, you should definitely build your Fire MC, because they are still the only character in the game that has a taunt, and they will still be very valuable because of that. Next, I got Himiko in here, and it's still pretty sad because, especially in the higher levels of MOC, I think there's only the freeze robot, like the big freeze robot, that deals with fire damage, but especially in MOC 10, completely useless. And Himiko herself she's definitely gotten a lot better and gotten a lot more recognition from the start of the game, but she just suffers a lot from being a typical erudition unit, you know, only focusing on that AoE damage, not getting a lot of single target damage, and the fact that her kit is super closely tied to weakness breaks, where especially in a lot of the boss fights in the game, you're not going to get that many weakness breaks if the enemy isn't weak to fire. So in Swarm Disasters, she's not optimal at all, especially in the higher levels of MOC, she's not super optimal, but I do think that she will get better in the future for sure. And she's still really reliable, being the only 5-star fire damage dealer. Now into A tier, I'm gonna start off with Yanqing here. So Yanqing really suffers from clunkiness like Dan Heng, for example, in the fact that his Soul Seal Stink needs him to be shielded at all times for it to have 100% uptime, because if he gets hit, his whole kit just goes out the window. But at the same time, with that Soul Steel kit, it makes him a lot easier to build, which you don't really see that much on a lot of damage dealers, because he gets inherent crit rate and crit damage in his talent. As long as you have his talent up, then he'll keep that for forever. And his ult also gives him crit rate and crit damage too. So he's a really easy character to build, and he does a lot of single target ice damage. Now the main question will be, how badly will he be power crept by Jingbi? And I'll talk about that later. But for now, Yanqing is a pretty decent option to have. Next, I'm gonna pair the two dot damage dealers we have right now, Sampo and Luca, together, because they're basically the same niche. You know, they're enabled by Kafka a lot more. And I have Luca over Sampo because the bleed dot overall is just ridiculous, especially if you get to break bleeds. Those go absolutely insane. You can get up to upwards of 80k with just break bleed dots, so that's why I have Luca over Sampo in this case. Next up we have Su Sheng, and pretty similar to Luca, she is really good with break bleeds, and especially in MOC 10. The only reason, I'm gonna be honest, I beat first half of MOC 10 was because of the break dots that I got from Su Sheng. Like I said, I was easily doing anywhere from 50k to 60k break bleed dots. She still really shines against physical weak enemies, and plus her kit is really in tune because it gives herself advanced forward, so you don't have to build speed boots on her, just focus on getting her crit up, her just overall attack up. And she's really flexible in the fact that you can build some break effect on her and she'll do amazing too against physical enemies. Finally, Bai Lu in A tier. She's still a really good sustainer, but she just suffers from the fact that 1.3 released 2 characters that actually deal with crowd control damage from the enemies, while she's still over there allowing everyone to get CC'd because she has no form of cleanse or crowd control resist. So even though her revive and her invigoration is still very viable and she will solo sustain your entire team because her heals are also pretty big, Bailu just suffers from having no cleanse on her team at all. Next up for the A plus S minus tier, this is the higher end of that super reliable or specific niche characters. And I got Yukong and Japard in here. Now Yukong, and this is assuming we're at E4, really helps out with, especially with Imbiber Renee. And obviously outside of that, her roaring strings, which are easier to get in that E4, are really helpful for the entire team. The only main issue is that, especially with E4, it's still really clunky to try and work around just losing those roaring string stacks. So that's why I don't have her in that S tier. But I'm pretty sure E6 Yukong is in S tier. But just going off by E4, she's still in that S minus tier. And then for Japard, best shielder in the game, but he also suffers from being the best shielder in the game because he doesn't provide anything else outside of that. And much like Bailu, he really suffers too from having 2 sustainer units that deal with crowd control and cleansings. He still provides a lot of value, and he 100% can solo sustain because he has the biggest shields in the game. But when you only can provide shields for your team, especially with, you know, Fushuen and Lynx and Watcha already out, and the fact that Huohuo might be able to do more things outside of just sustaining, Japard's value kind of diminishes because he's just only known as that shielder. But overall, he's still a really great character. Now getting into the meat of the video with S tier and basically all the other characters that are above that. So starting off S tier, we got Ching Chue. She's had the biggest glow up in 1.3 because of Swarm Disaster and the fact that people are realizing that you can work around her skill point greediness, especially if you have her E6, but you know, we're talking in terms of only E4, which she does so much damage as a 4-star unit, and she's super easy to build. You know, just get 4-piece quantum on her, and she just pops off so much with not only with her follow, I guess it's a follow-up attack or like a second attack. Yeah, it's just a follow-up attack with her E4, and the fact that she has a lot of self-buffing with its basic attack and her skill actually increasing her own damage every time she draws a tile, and her ultimate providing more damage increase for her enhanced basic. She just pops off every single time she gets those enhanced basics. Next, moving on to Welt, he is my king. He is the king of my account. I have him E3 S1. He is absolutely amazing, but to just tamper expectations, especially, you know, with a certain Danny boy out right now, I had to tamper my expectations and realize that Welt isn't as flexible as I thought he was because of the fact that his skill bounces around. Now, he still does really good damage despite that fact because his ultimate has decent multipliers, and the fact that when you're in a single target scenario, all 3 of those bounce hits will hit on that single target enemy. And that's not even considering the fact that he's the only character in the game that slows down the enemies. And especially with his imprisonment, he's just the best hybrid of damage dealing and debuffing characters 100%. And if you have a Welt, I recommend you, especially even if you have an Imbiber Lune already, I highly recommend you to build Welt because he's the only character that can slow enemies down consistently. Next, we have Clara. Really simple character, really simple, great character. Focuses on counter attacks, follow-up attacks. She's really reliable, really tanky. You just plug her into any team that you want, and she will perform great because she doesn't need anyone else other than Svarog. Next up, Jing Yuan. He is still standing strong. He's not as mid-Yuan as everyone's saying, especially with the release of Fushuen. She really helped him out, I'm not gonna lie. But even outside of Fushuen, just the fact that even though he still has a lot of problems, you know, his CC issues with Lightning Lord, his Lightning Lord bouncing around all enemies on the field and not doing the most damage to the boss, the fact that he still performs well is just testament to him as a character, you know, because against all odds, he's still performing extremely well in LC 10. I'm pretty sure his hyper carry comp was one of the most popular team comps amongst CN. Just that alone should be enough for him to still be a reliable character. Next up, we got 3 4-star support units. First one, Pela, the most free-to-play friendly defensive shredding unit in the entire game. You don't need to build her attack at all. You just need to build some HP on her so she's really tanky, and some effect hit rate on her too. But if you have Silverwolf's free light cone, then that's not an issue at all because she just provides so much defense shredding. And the fact that Pela can provide up to 45% is still really valuable inside of a 4-star character. Not to even mention her E4, which just makes her the best ice supporter for any ice DPS coming out in the game because of that 12% ice resistance reduction. Next up, Lynx, the killer of Natasha. Why the fuck did you have to do it, my girl? But basically, the AoE cleanse is huge. And also the fact that her survival response can synergize well with characters that want to get hit, like Clara and Blade and future characters that will come out like that, is super huge for her value overall, because she'll be the best in slot sustainer for those characters that want to get constantly hit. One main drawback of Lynx, however, is the fact that some destruction characters don't even want to get hit. Like in Bible Lune, just wants to deal damage, and if you use the skill on a Bible Lune to heal him, then he'll suffer a lot from that. Rounding out the S tier, we got Asta. I think she's the second best team-wide damage buff, because if you get those 5 stacks on her consistently, she's given the entire team up for almost 50% attack boost, and that alongside her speed gains is just ridiculous. And especially at E4 too, if you get meshing cogs with that E4, you're getting her ultimate up like every two turns or something. Like the energy gains on that is completely ridiculous. Now moving on into S plus tier, starting out the list, Seela. She is still holding out strong. People are saying that she's downgraded this patch, but in my opinion, being the only quantum damage dealer that can buff herself in terms of speed and damage boost and having that resurgence over and over again is still incredibly valuable. And the fact that she still does strong in the least favorable conditions for her kit is just testament to her overall capacity as a character. So Seal is still holding out strong in 1.3. Don't know what the future has for her, but she's still holding out strong. Next up, Kafka. This is just super simple. Best overall lightning damage dealer in the game. Best future-proof character in the entire game. Just best future-proof damage dealer in the game, because she will always benefit damage over time dealers, and she'll just get better with time. She'll just age like fine wine, even though she's already amazing as is. Next up, the best 4-star in the game, Ting Yun. Incredible damage, incredible attack boost, incredible damage boost, incredible energy gains, and very skill point efficient because of the benediction that lasts for 3 turns overall. So Ting Yun, super easy S plus tier. Actually, I think Blade is actually the king of my account. Even though I have Welt E3 S1, Blade is my best damage dealer on the account. And I don't need to explain this at all. The most self-sustaining damage dealer in the entire game. He functions like Clara, but much more aggressively, because not only is he always getting hit, but he always hits back with basically everything a part of his enhanced basic, his ultimate, his follow-ups are all incredible avenues for him to do damage. Next up, Fu Xuan. She is the queen of my account for very good reason. I feel like she has the most unique kit in the entire game because of the fact that she sustains the team by taking a lot of the damage for herself. And not even just that, just the fact that she provides crit rate and max HP and a crowd control resistance and does decent damage alongside that, and she can heal herself up and also heals up the other team, or heals up her allies too. She just has so much a part of her kit that is just amazing. And she's 100% on the same tier as Luocha. They are 1 and 2 of the best sustainers in the entire game. Speaking of Luocha too, this is also easy. Cleanse on the skill being super easy to proc without skill points. You don't even need to use skill points on Luocha. And his talent, his healing field, healing every single time an ally attacks. Like, he's super easy. He's super easy to just put into a team comp. Absolutely incredible character overall. Finally, rounding out the S plus tier is Bronya, and this is also self-explanatory too. Best skill in the entire game that gives damage boost a cleanse, and an action forward is there's nothing else I can compare to this game in terms of support capabilities. 3 of the most valuable things in this entire damn game into one skill is absolutely ridiculous. And even just outside of that, the fact that she doesn't need to use skill points every single time, because you can align her with her basic attack, which gives her an action forward. You can align that to be ahead or behind your DPS and then still provide that damage boost. Now finally for triple S, I've mentioned every single character except 2. I think you already know who the 2 are. Like I said, these 2 are supposed to have very heavy trade-offs in their kits, but there's so many easy ways to just work around said trade-offs to just make them completely broken in the game. Those 2 characters are Imbiber Lune and Silverwolf. Silverwolf, her whole trade-off thing was the fact that her skill has a smaller percentage when the party isn't one specific type, she might need a lot of effect hit rate. But once you just work around those simple things, she just breaks the game. You'll get whatever elemental weakness you want to put on the enemy as long as you just build the right team comp. And then you just stack effect hit rate, not only with, you don't even need main staff. You can just use the free 4-star light cone we got, which gives 40% effect hit rate, and then you just get lucky with effect hit rate stats. You don't need that much effect hit rate at all on her. And Imbiber Lune, this motherfucker is the sneakiest, most devious dude in the entire game, because his whole thing, and it still exists, the fact that he takes up skill points to do the ridiculous amounts of damage. The game is at a point where you can set up your team comps to have characters that don't use any skill points at all. You'll always have 3 skill points ready to always do his ridiculous nuke damage. So yeah, these 2 characters were supposed to have greater trade-offs than what was actually in practice in game, and therefore they're in triple S tier because they completely break the game. Now with 1.3 out the way, I want to do some speculation on characters that will improve or decline in 1.4. Starting with the characters that will clearly decline, Yanqing, because Jing Liu can literally do everything that Yanqing does, much higher damage and much more skill point efficiency. And plus her kit isn't as clunky and as greedy as Yanqing. Finally, I think the last character that will be greatly affected by 1.4 is Hook, because Topaz is basically gonna power creep her. Hook's whole main thing is dealing single target fire damage, so just process of elimination, Topaz being a 5-star single target fire damage dealer, the power creep is gonna go crazy. Next for characters who I think will improve in 1.4, I think the biggest winner in 1.4 will be Himiko because of Topaz's follow-up buffs. Himiko's whole thing obviously is to get 3 weakness breaks and get that follow-up attack in tandem with Topaz's follow-up damage increase. She will really benefit from not only just that follow-up damage increase, but having a synergy with another fire damage dealer. Finally, I want to jump into the 1.4 characters coming out and see where they'll end up by the end of that patch. So starting off with Gwynethyn, I might be overreaching with her, but the reason I put her in the same tier as Japard is because she's the first fire dot damage dealer that will increase overall damage that the enemy takes. And I'm pretty sure she's the first character, especially first 4-star character, that provides this. Not only will this benefit the dot team, but you can honestly plug her in to another team comp outside of dot and have her apply that fire kiss debuff, which just increases the damage that the enemies take. Now this really banks on how much that multiplier is. If it's really just single percentages, then she will definitely not be in A+ S- tier. She'll definitely fit into A tier. If the overall damage taken is high, especially with the fact that it can stack, we have a dangerous 4-star unit on our hands right here. Next up for Topaz and Numby, I think she'll be pretty comfortable in S tier as of now, because even though her whole thing is about follow-up damage, there's not that many follow-up damagers in the game where they'll actually benefit Topaz a lot. And her capabilities as being a hyper carry I feel like will just not be as great of numbers as, you know, the Blades or the Silas or the Kafkas, but definitely look out for her being a lot higher in the future with more follow-up damage heroes coming out. Now finally for Jing Liu, her damage numbers are going to be absolutely ridiculous, and I see her being really similar to Blade, being a super efficient damage dealer in terms of skill points while also dealing ridiculous numbers overall. So I predict she'll be in the S+ tier pretty comfortably for the time to come. So that just about wraps it up for the 1.3 tiers going into 1.4. Let me know where you guys rank all the characters, and leave a comment down below who you're most excited to see pop off in 1.4. And as always, I'll see you guys later.